Hello and welcome to the Crone Gallery in Vienna. We're here for the opening of the show called Claims by the artist Emmanuel Bornstein. My name is Deborah Feldman. I am so honored to be able to guide you through the exhibition this evening. I am not an art critic or an art historian. I'm a writer, but like Emmanuel, I am descended from Holocaust survivors. In fact, I was raised by Holocaust survivors, just like the artist. And as a result, I find that the themes I preoccupy myself with in my own work have a sort of strong overlap with the themes that Emmanuel Bornstein deals with in his work. So I feel like I do have a little bit of access to these ideas. So this is the artist Emmanuel.
Thanks, Deborah.
You're welcome. Emmanuel and I are actually close friends, so don't be too surprised if you see us acting a little bit more relaxed than professional. We spent many months in his atelier watching these paintings come to fruition, discussing them, discussing their implications and their meanings, and I think we both feel pretty emotional about all of these paintings hanging on the wall.
Yeah.
We're going to start with paintings titled Cull number 1 and Cull number 2. So what we see in these paintings are figures that are only outlined. Emmanuel tends to have 3 kinds of figures in his work. I call them transparent, translucent, and realized. And here we would have the kind of figure that I would call translucent. What's very interesting to me about these paintings is that the figures are not in the foreground. They're actually in the background. So if we look quite closely, we see that everything around the figures is actually painted on top of them, over them. And so the reality of the figures is called into question. What's really there? What is being shown to us and what is being concealed? The reason that we decided to call these paintings Cull is actually a very violent word. As in German, Keulen, it's usually used to refer to animals that have been selected for death because of disease. We chose a violent word for paintings that depict violence. We talked about this a lot, about...
Yeah, we had a lot of discussion because I'm a painter, but I came from a family with writer and theater, and I think that's also what we connect, because we had the same background historically, but we also have the same kind of lover in terms of writers, what we really love, what we admire, what we always question. And I think very genuinely we talked a lot. You bring a lot of impression because Deborah came a lot to the studio in the process of the last year, as you say, and you saw basically every steps on paintings. You were the one the most present in the studio. You were very there discussing and bringing you on feedback, energy, reaction to the works. And I think in this discussion I allowed more than ever someone to be close to me and in this discussion. And I think, for example, the title, you talk about curl. This is something that merged out of our exchange. It is, and for me that's been, Deborah has been very generous, and our exchange has been very important in the whole process of this Claims exhibition.
We did discover pretty early on that we read the same literature, that we are deeply moved and inspired by the same literature, and much of the literature that we read and that informs our work is the literature of Holocaust survivors. And one of the things I referred to in the text about the show is that it opens with the claim by Jean Amery that the final duty was death, and anybody who was culled from death, was burdened with the shame of having survived. And this is a theme that many Holocaust survivors deal with in their literature, and it's something that from personal experience as well as myself. My own grandparents
I would not call it for me personal experience. I would call it like from and something like it's that I inherited from my father's side of my history.
Yeah.
And this is through silence. So that's also why for me it's something that is we talked a lot about that. It's transformed to art.
Yeah.
Because it's all like, how do you capture this, and how do you put it into art, and how do you, actually claim for the right to do so?
Yeah.
And I think it's something that you experience.
Your father was born in 45?
46.
46.
Yeah.
So for me, one of the things that is very unique about our friendship is you're the only person in my generation who knows what it's like to have such a close relationship to that time in history. Which I do as well, because I've been raised by my grandparents who themselves were very burdened by guilt for having survived. And like you said, they were silent about this guilt, but it was nevertheless ever present, and it was something I had to deal with on my own because they weren't willing to talk it through with me. And this is why I ended up reading writers like Paul Celan and Imre Kertész and John Amarie to try to figure out how to deal with this for myself, right? Because it became my burden. But as we discussed in terms of having claims, is that we ourselves have complex relationship to this burden because we don't even know if we have the right to carry this burden or tell people that we carry it.
Yeah.
So just coming back to call number 1 and 2, for me, these paintings are a really great introduction to your entire exhibition because they depict the struggle between times and between generations for me. And it's hard to tell which is which. It's hard to tell which generation you're depicting with which figure.
And that's something very important because for me what we see, it's unclear. And that's actually this ambiguity that's really matter to me. Because like, we talk about curl, but what are we looking at? And for me it's very important that when you look at this painting, you actually feel this anxiety, but you actually feel also like the ambiguity of what is that? What's happening? Is it somebody that is drawn and somebody try to save this person from death, or actually it's actually coming from this mass murder where people like throw the bodies into the graves? It obviously refers to also image that we see right now with all people like dying all over the world, and we don't know where to put the body. So it's also like, so I would not say it's my role to determine and to tell you, or the audience
what's really happening.
What's really happening there.
I remember
actually, it's very important
when I first came to the studio to see these paintings, and I said, are they being pulled or are they pulling? I was talking about the figures that are sort of outside of this mysterious mass from which these white translucent figures are emerging, because I think our first instinct would be that there is a rescue happening, right? Because images of rescue are familiar to us at this moment. We think of the Mediterranean, we think of the current images of rescue, but at the same time, we wonder if this is not the past come to pull us back.
Yes, that's a very important.
Yeah. And I felt like this was the best place to start because this introduces us to the themes that we will be dealing with as we move on. I'd like to take us to call number 3, which is the next painting in the series. So this is already a little bit more contemporary for me, because this is an image that we know from our society today. This is the image of people living in between danger and security, right? They're what we call in precarity. They have a source of warmth and nourishment, but they are also needing to protect themselves against the elements.
Yes, and the motive could also come. I had this series of work, that you saw, like when the first wave of the virus hit us. It was like this series called Chronicle of Isolation that I post every day with the artist Vladimir Potapov. And from that I capture like every day like something from my daily life. Being in Berlin, we took very seriously the first lockdown. We didn't know what's happening, and so these paintings are also based on nowadays imagery. And I think, that's what you feel also in this painting. Like you don't really know like the first 2 curl, but you also experience something which is talking about today, to my opinion. I think you have the same feeling in this work, no?
It's definitely happening on 2 levels. I'd just like to draw our attention to to this element of the painting, because this is an element that will repeat itself. And it's, especially if we zoom in and we look at the texture, again, it's looking like it's background, it's actually foreground, and we have a sort of curve. And I think we're going to be looking at something similar in future paintings. I think this is where we begin to see the artist breaking worlds. So we're beginning to see a phenomenon that will occur in other works, which is the idea of a hidden world revealing itself.
And for me, what's also very important here, and we talked a lot about that, is this painting, they like scars, they have a skin, they torn apart. It's like pieces of paper, it's alike pieces of paper also with the white frame that I use, or and you actually, it's really like pieces of canvas, glued together. So you have like this feeling of
dimensions,
a damaged body, and it's like the idea of this damaged painting that is alive, and it's for me very close to this concept from Artaud that what is alive has to suffer. So in order to give life to an artwork, you have to attack the canvas, the paper,
the world.
And, the
world
and we talk about the world,
torn,
and then it's like transfer this very narratives idea to actually art, to the painting, to give life to an artwork. And this artwork become, look at you. And that's the perfect example, like we're facing like a painting that actually look at us.
Yeah, this is where your work is getting more personal in the exhibition. You call this painting Father Figure number 4.
Yeah.
Whenever I look at it, I call it Heschel.
Yeah.
Because I was in your studio and I saw the photographs of your ancestors, and I remember thinking, you're the only other person I know who has all these. I have the same collection of photographs at home, and I draw so much strength and a sense of identity from them. And when I was younger, I was just absolutely obsessed with them. I was obsessed with the people in the photographs. I needed to know them, and I feel like, when I saw this painting and the other paintings that are in this series, I thought, well, that's the same obsession, that same of like, that deep desire to know someone that you will never be able to know.
And to give them back to life in a way, like to have us as stars above us, with us.
Yeah, I mean, the figure here is also in movement. It's moving toward us. It's looking at us.
I think movement is very important.
Yeah.
This is a key word for me in my work. Like I want the paintings to be dynamic. All those, like it's like something that links past and present toward the future. But it's very important that we have this moving dimension. That things step into our world to us. Yeah.
One of the things I find interesting when I look at the work you've done on your ancestors, at least the ones that you haven't met, right? The ones that you didn't know, is that they seem very innocent. They seem very pure. They seem, in a sense, what I theorized, untouched by shame.
But that's back to the text that you wrote, because are we the survivors, carrying this shame because
they have been freed from this.
Because you talk about air show, so the background. So when I did this show that is actually known in the Musée de la Résistance et de la Déportation in the Lot-Garonne in Toulouse, I did this show about I have a lot of access to archives from my family and family members, and I found this picture from Ershe and Rajla, and both parents from my grandmother that. They all been deported, and Rajla and Ershe has been deported and died pretty young in Auschwitz. And I think for me to paint them, to look at us, it's also for me. It all strangely gives me a feeling of security. Yeah. I don't know if you could relate to this.
Definitely, and I very much relate, and I very much connected to this in the very beginning, where I realized that the relationship that we have to the dead is always so much less complicated than the ones that we have to the living, and it's so much more hope-giving, right, and inspiring. And I feel the same way about the ancestors I was never able to meet. And so, in a sense, the innocence and the purity that you see in the figure is already death.
Yeah.
In a sense, death in your work is the least violent element.
So we think the death is actually brings security,
peace,
where actually being alive is the most struggling, problematic, difficult.
Yes, it's the ugliness,
in the representation of life in the work itself.
Yeah, that's sort of my impression. I love the warmth that you have in this painting. I love the way the colors come together to almost convey life. Like precisely when we're looking at somebody who is in a sense frozen in death, who is looking at us from beyond death, we actually have the most life-affirming color scheme and a very life-affirming technique, right? I mean, almost like you can almost still hear the blood moving through the veins. Whereas in the figures that are tormented by life, we sense that death, has a grip over them, that they are still in the shadow of death because they have not submitted to death. Whereas in a sense, as Jean-Marie claimed, submitting to that final duty of death was freedom.
But I think it gets back to the first thing that you say in front of the two Kull painting, that we have this different representation of human being in the work, and the one that close to me, like Escher, or that we go to the other room soon, is they have a face, they look at us, they take care of us. The one without the face, like in the Kull series, actually, as you say, like they merge from the background of the painting, and I think this is, I insist on this because it's a very important point. They really come from the first layer, and everything else, the walls around, is actually, come after.
Yeah.
And I think this is not just an aesthetic thing; it's also carry a lot of meaning with it.
And it transfers the roles, right? The figures become the world becomes the figure. What I do find interesting about these translucent figures, as I call them, is that unlike the earlier ones in Kull 1 and 2, there seems to be light and warmth emanating from the core of these figures. It's something I remarked upon when I first saw those paintings. I was like, here you start to see the beginning of some independent, autonomous life energy. So I felt that this was a sort of a natural progression, because out of that struggle that you depicted in Kull 1 and Kull 2, out of that struggle must come something, right? There must be some result, some kind of energy that's generated by friction, the way that you would make a fire, by striking one object against another.
I mean, you talk about fire, but it's very present in these paintings because, it's more than ever in this series of work, like the fire, the water are very present elements. You have something which is very,
the four elements are very
the four
present,
elements are extremely, also from the color choice, is like very important.
Yeah, I wanna take us to another very interesting painting that is going to connect to these themes. So here we have the painting titled Oblivion. I remember when we were talking about this word, we were asking ourselves, are these words too harsh? Are all of these terms too harsh? What we see is a figure of a woman holding a child. And I automatically said mother when I saw the figure, especially because the curve of the belly suggests a very recent birth. And that means it also suggests a very recent trauma and a kind of a rending of worlds and a transformation of atmospheres. And in the beginning, I used to think this was the center of the painting. And I think with time, I was able to step back and understand that it also serves as a representation of what the entire painting is, because here we go back to what I referred to earlier.
Yes, the arch, the curve, the cycle.
And the fact that we now see even more clearly that we have multiple dimensions, we have multiple worlds in one painting.
That's something that, we talked a lot about that, and you were like, oh, this is maybe the most complex work from the whole series in terms of composition and
Yeah, I do. I find the composition brilliant. I think this is when we just started discussing the Kabbalah, right, and the theory of
it's true. We
the
had
spaces
this very
between
discussion.
worlds.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Because to me, this is about the spaces between worlds and the fact that, being in between worlds is considered, also in Judaism, but not only, as like the worst fate for a soul, right? Worse than death or the pain and struggle of life is in between, is the nothingness. And the figure seems to emerge precisely from that nothingness, from that space in between. She's not behind all the worlds, she's not in front of all the worlds. And so, in a sense, this woman holding a child, is if you step away and you force yourself to kind of abandon that expected cliche, then it starts to be something more demonic, something.
What do you mean by
well,
demonic?
In the Jewish tradition, a demon is called a shed. And what is a demon? Essentially, a soul that God was crafting during creation. And then, when the Sabbath arrived, he ceased to craft souls. And so there were these unfinished souls.
Yes.
And they were forever condemned to remain in the space between. And they consistently tried to emerge from this space, in a sense, to claim their place in one world or the other.
Yes.
Both in heaven and in earth. And so I stopped seeing, a human mother, and I started seeing more that pain of being half finished, of not being human, of not being angel.
It's a very interesting way to look at the painting. It gives you a complete different perspective on it somehow, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's
and Oblivion. It's like
we called it Oblivion
that,
because that space in between is the space of nothingness, and it's also the space of forgetting and of being forgotten. And of course, our worst fear about those who die is that they don't die, they simply cease to be, which is worse, right, than death. In death, we have dignity and hope, and we have the fantasy.
I think you're completely right. This is what this painting is all about at the end,
That fear.
Yes, that's fear, yeah. And the anxiety that came with it,
Going back to the personal for a second, here we have father figure number 3. And
this is a very specific painting. This is a painting very specific in the show.
This is your father.
This is my father. This is a painting of my father.
Yeah, it's the man who raised you. This is your father as a young man.
Yeah.
Again, we have, if we just look at the face for a second, because I've always been very consumed by the face. Before we talked about how Heschel, and later when we're going to see Rajla, have an incredible innocence and a purity. And with your father, I see this as well. I see that pure and wide-eyed innocence, but I see something else which the Germans call Schelm im Nacken, which is the saying of having a little devil on your shoulder. There's something alive about the fact that there is playfulness, that there is even a defiance, and a kind of autonomy and also aloneness.
In the figure.
In the figure's face, I see a determined and very much, kind of an isolation that he is claiming for himself, and a distance from, not only from the past or from what he's looking at, but a distance from the world and from humans. A kind of insistence on walking that border between the worlds, not being in nothingness, but being on that border.
Yeah, for me also what's very specific in this painting, so as you say, it's like painting for my father, and he's alive, and I'm talking to him quite often, and so he's present in my life. And so for me also, I mean, we had this discussion in the studio, but when I did this painting, it made me, from the position of my father, or maybe I did this position because of this reason, and I realized it only later, is, I thought of Angelus Novus from, Paul Klee, and a beautiful text from, it's a big reference for the both of us, but from Walter Benjamin.
Yeah.
And I read the text and I thought, oh wow, this actually the movement that he is in his body is exactly, him, going to the, to life, to the present, to the future, but turning his back to the past and looking back for a moment and being caught in this storm, he cannot fly and move on.
But he has a vehicle.
Yes.
That's the thing.
Yes.
He has a vehicle. He's
the bike.
empowered.
But the
yes.
bike
yes.
is there to, that's the bike that makes him, potentially move.
Fly. And again, we come back to this that we will
Shapes.
see. Yes, these arches,
yes.
these seams, these layers of different dimensions. So here we really see a figure who is completely empowered in his movements through the dimensions.
Yes, and we're back to the painting from Escher that we say about the movement. They all are either stopped in the movement or caught in action, but it's like always this dynamic aspect in the walk.
And my response to it when I first saw it was that the painting it's melancholic, but it's also very hopeful.
Mm-hmm. Because of this reason, you think the movement is?
Yes, and of course, all of the narrative that's in the face and that very defiant and proud glance that I see, and I see a lot of love. Obviously, this is somebody that you have a lot of love for, that has love for you. And so it is very hopeful, in my opinion. And I say this only because the other works in the series, some of them are so very violent and so very hopeless. And coming from Oblivion, which we just discussed, which is so assaulting, right? In the sense of despair and darkness that it communicates. It's interesting to me how there can be so many contradictions. There can be so much love and hope and defiance, and at the same time an acknowledgement of a kind of impenetrable and insurmountable darkness and threat.
But this complexity is, that's what we try to.
Yeah. The complexity is essentially representative of the conflict inherent to our lives and to our work.
But I would say inherit from life, because I think it's these claims that we talked about are, it could take many aspects, and in a way this is a portrait from my father, but for somebody that look at it from a different perspective, it could also just be, like a human being, a man that looked back and see.
Yes,
what's up? And question us.
We could all be this person,
and we could all be also involved in the.
Before we get into this work that we keep passing, I'm going to take us to what I consider the highlight of your exhibition, and it's a painting that you actually completed later, quite recently.
Yeah.
I remember when you told me you had the idea.
Yeah.
And this is essentially a self-portrait.
Yeah, this work, this work is a self-portrait. I did this painting quite recently. It's one of the latest from the series, and it's in a way, it's like I paint myself with something very heavy on the shoulder, all this. And maybe it is I did this painting after all these walks, after I think I work on these paintings for the last 2 years. I do think the position that I paint myself, and the title of the work is also cult.
As in past tense, correct.
As a past tense, which is, that's connected to the one where we see all this violent imagery. So it's maybe me as, being passive, being cult, but also being passive, because this is in the one we talk about the movement, the dynamic, but in this one, and it's also referred to other works that I did in the last years, this is this figure of this man standing passive, and I think it's maybe a way that I see I try to do so many things, but at the end it's something that where we want to change a lot, and we so it's maybe it has a sadness in it.
I think that's going to be clear.
It has a sadness in it, and it's not only, but I think it's very loaded with this.
And we can see again all of the seams that are visible in this painting. There are very many seams, especially here. We even have a very frayed edge right at the center of the figure.
Yeah, for me that was very like this in these works, like some others, but like in this one, like this, pieces of, like canvas glued together. They really like, we talk about the Golem, we talk about these broken vases, it's that's where come the life, because the way I see a painting for me is like it's two different aspects in terms of painting. It's like the painting is like the figure that you see as a, in narration, representation aspect, but also like the painting for itself looked at you, has a skin, has a life.
Yeah.
And this dimension, this is, the spagat as you do as a figurative painter, when you paint actually figure and human being, is like being in one hand painting a face, a figure, a body, like a movement, this dimension, but also like then the painting itself tells you a story by itself, which is not a narrative one, but which is life. It's life, and all this.
But it's very interesting that you mentioned Golem, right?
Yes.
Golem is the Jewish mythical man made of clay, which is in itself a bit misleading because the first man was named Adam, which means earth because he was made of earth, right? So essentially, a man is made of clay. But the Golem was supposedly created by the rabbi of Prague, I believe in the 13th century, and what was so magical about him was he didn't have a soul, so he obeyed every command that the rabbi gave him. It's, in a sense, the relationship between the rabbi and his golem, that rabbi was God and had created a man, but he did not have the power to imbue the man with a soul in the human sense. And I remember when I first saw the painting, I was very focused on the angle of the stare of the figure, sort of not really staring at anything in particular, but certainly staring down. And then you have this element, which I find very interesting. And the first thing that occurred to me was that very famous poem by the Hungarian poet Miklos Radnóti, who speaks about blood mixed with mud. And he's speaking of this scene of violent destruction and death occurring in 1944 as the Nazis invaded Hungary, where people are being shot and falling into the mud, and their blood is mixing with the mud. And the SS are walking through and shouting to each other, "Der springt noch auf!" And this is what he hears. And in this moment, he asks himself, will I too jump up? Werde ich auch aufspringen or not? And we know he didn't. We know he didn't. But Imre Kertész uses the same saying. He says, "Ich bin doch aufgesprungen." I also leaped up. So that we understand that the act of surviving was about leaping up from this mud mixed with blood. And at the same time, you never escape it. This mud followed all of the survivors. They were never able to cleanse themselves of this mud. And so when I thought, of course, the first thing I thought of was, here is someone who has emerged from the mud, but he cannot stop looking at it. He cannot stop focusing on it.
It's very interesting because for these bronze shapes for me could also, it's a very mysterious shapes, and you actually wonder where.
We have those elements that we discussed earlier. We have light in this painting. Yeah. But we are turned away from the light, and the light is stopped. But in the same time,
like I painted in a very warm blue. It's like this very strong, protective color, compared to, because for example in this work, like which is Curl 2, like the palette is completely different. That was a work for me that, to be honest, when I did this work, you know that.
You wanted to get rid of it.
I almost destroyed this work because I worked so long, so much on it. It's maybe the more full in terms of color. But I was like,
if we can take a closer look at this painting is very interesting because I would say this painting is extremely saturated. It's like you cannot add one more brush stroke.
That's what you tell me when you came to the studio. We were talking, and I was like, oh wow, I worked so long, so much in this painting. It's something, and it's very interesting because I called it like, it's Curl 2, but the way I described it to you was like, this is a self-portrait as Beckett. This is very interesting. I don't know why. It's something but I had the feeling like these two works, and it's very interesting in the show that you have this work that actually look at the Curl 1 and 2 because in the relation, what is this figure has to do with what is this man, what is, you know, this self-portrait in a way, as the artist. Why I have to depict myself, you know, as Beckett? This question I ask myself, you know, it's like I don't say I have an answer for that.
I think the fact that we have this grid and that we have the figure behind the grid, I mean, Beckett certainly, I mean, has been interpreted in many different directions, but he himself admitted that, you know, he was outside of himself. His work deals a lot with alienation.
The distance, yes, yeah.
Being outside of yourself and believing that being outside of oneself and truth is necessary in order to offer anything of value in a narrative.
But do you think it's the role of the artist? Do you think it has to do with the role of the artist? This is a question, because like we talk about like self-portrait is like the way to... Maybe.
To me, these are conflicting alternatives.
Yes.
And this is, I mean, the reason why we called both of these paintings Called is because, you know, it seems to me to represent an inner split, an inner conflict between the options of like, you know, do I passively bend to the burden of the past, you know, in order to honor it and to pay my debt to it, or, you know, or do I free myself, but as a result, trap myself outside of my own identity?
Yeah, this is a way to see it. Yeah.
I'm going to take us upstairs now into a very small room where we probably won't fit, to take you to a painting titled The Interloper. This is why it's all alone in a room upstairs, because the interloper is where he does not belong. And I think that this painting is also an outsider in the exhibition because it's very, very contemporary. It's very much rooted in our time and our moment, and it's very much rooted in the central problems of our time. And I think it shows the connection.
You see these works like has a, you see this, yeah, it's very interesting to say that. As a figure, the figure in the painting, you had the feeling this referred to like,
and also the landscape. I mean, I'll be honest with you, when I first saw it, I thought it was Berlin. We both live in Berlin.
You said it was Berlin. It's very...
And Berlin, you know, especially in 2015, was the city of refugees.
So for you, this painting has to do a lot with refugee, huh?
I think it has to do with the problem in our moment of how we consider people to be insiders or outsiders.
Yes, and also in the painting, this is very interesting you said that, because in the process itself, from the painting, it's maybe the one where the inside, the world around, and the inside of the figure itself is like linked, because it's like, you know, it's communicated. It's nothing, you know, that's bond separates. It's all bond at one, in one, you know, movement dynamics. You know, maybe the face pop up like with this, like, you know, but even the face is like, you know.
I mean, also the figure
in this storm of colors and
in those three categories that we talked about translucent, transparent, and realized.
Yeah.
Your figure is sort of in between. I mean, it incorporates elements of all of your different figures.
For me, this is very important. As you say, like you say, it's like contemporary, and you talk about today. This is something which is very essential in my work for me, because you know, at the end, what I try to do with all these works is, you know, question the past in order to apprehend, you know, the time we live in right now, and to see, you know, what could we do.
And notice that in comparison to the other works, the seams aren't as apparent here. The fragments aren't as clearly bordered. Instead, what we have is a kind of, in German you would say verwischt. So everything has been sort of smeared.
Yes, but the inside of the body, the painting itself, the skin, everything is like, you know.
And that's like, to me, that represents all that chaos and overwhelming
the world
confusion.
And overwhelming, yeah.
And that's what makes it so contemporary to me. The fact that the dimensions aren't even clearly delineated from each other. So that all the worlds start to blend into each other and to coexist.
But this figure, compared to the others, like he is standing, you know, he's standing and he moves forward, and he has this, you know, very strong. He has weight in his hand, but you know the shoulders are free, and he has like a very, you know, dynamic motion. It's like, you know, it's not, you know, it's like so for me, although he has this, you know, he has a, And we talk again about the narrative, but the whole painting for me has a very fresh energy, although the painting has this weight, you know?
Yeah,
And
there's
this is
definitely a determination to claim one's right to life.
Right. Right.
You know, and the title, The Interloper, you know, is, I think we were considering various different options. We were considering the immigrant, you know, the stranger, and I think interloper is interesting because...
Once you say something interesting, you say like this, yeah, like the way you understand the interloper, the meaning of it is like...
Well, we move away from classical understandings of belonging in terms of nationality,
yes.
right? And we the interloper is someone who doesn't belong because people decide he doesn't belong, right? And he is somewhere where he's not supposed to be because other people don't want him there. And there's something much more elemental about that than simply being of the wrong nationality or the wrong skin color. You know, it goes back to the essence of all violence and discrimination, you know, for which we might find excuses.
Yes.
But which at the end of the day is you know, it's like the most animalistic urge and the most animal-like experience a human being can have.
It's interesting you said that, because now we're going to see the painting which actually has a slightly different way of dealing with the representation of human being in a way, because it's like very much reduced, and it leads actually to the shift that we're going to have in the show. Yeah, we're going to go to Reparation is the title of the painting. Yes. Yeah, that's going to be our link to what will still come in the future. Something exciting that you'll have to tune because
in
we
again
have to
for.
explain. So what, you want to say like?
Well, you know, we are going to have 3 paintings in this exhibition are going to be removed in the middle of May.
Exactly. Fata Figure, I think it's the 12th. Fata Figure 3, 4, and Oblivion. Exactly.
And we are going to be replacing these paintings with 3 new works that represent a shift in the narrative. And the connection to those 3 paintings that are still to come, that we will be sharing with you together soon, is this painting called Reparation, which we'll take a look at now. So we called this painting Reparation as a translation from the Hebrew term tikkun. From
we talk about tikkun a lot.
This is the central idea of fate in Judaism, is that we are born to fix the world.
It's something that, you know, came to my mind when you said that, because, you know, it's like this clear border. We had this in the self-portrait as well. It's funny because the 2 paintings dialogue a lot. And these lines that actually put 2 words and 2 kind of structure, and the figure has his hand from the other side from it. And it's something that you were related a lot, and you kind of, it's catch a lot your attention. And
I mean, we're dealing here also with a transparent figure, right? Which is something that has come up in your work before and will be coming in future paintings in this exhibition.
Yes. And the palette is also very different.
Exactly.
The palette is extremely different in this
we're dealing regardless of which world we're dealing with the unseen, right? We're dealing with unseen energies. So if this is in dialogue with the self-portrait, it is certainly in dialogue in the sense that this is something happening on a hidden level. And I remember when I first saw it, when I saw the relationship between the 2 worlds, and I saw the seam, and the first thing I said was Tikkun Olam, and then you told me about the Kabbalistic idea of the broken vessel, of the idea of holiness being
it was something that I think when
shards.
I did, because I think you saw this painting 2-3 times before it was finished, right? And I think it looked quite like the painting for a while, but what changed, it's a very slow process, is all the line that you see here. I think with the camera you could look at, it's like all this fragmented part for me, like to keep the fragility of the painting, but to really have, like, you know, a very strong presence more than in any other painting, in this the fragility of the material itself, and the figure being like caught in these, lines.
Yeah.
For me, that's all about this painting. At the end, this really expressed the core, the soul of this.
Well, I mean, in the Kabbalah, there is this idea that the world came into creation as an act of shattering, as in a sense, as holiness shattering into a million tiny shards,
yes.
And that earthliness is the state of being broken, and that our job, when we say fixing the world, or tikkun olam, or reparation, is in a sense to put the pieces back together, to fuse everything back to a whole, which is impossible also, right? That's the tragedy of it. It's impossible. It's work you can do till the end of time. And here there is an active effort, though. There's an active effort to fuse the pieces together, to find out where they fit, and to try to.
It's very interesting you say that, and I think this is because this painting, it's a motif that I paint a lot in my the last 5-6 years, that I call in French le petit ramasseur de poche. Poche from the south is like the bags, like all this. And for me, this figure came also from this man, that's, that collects things in tubes in the street. And, always with, it came back to my self-portrait with always the heaviness of the...
Flaschensammler.
Yes, Flaschensammler in German. And it could also be seen like, as a scene where it's like a movement. It's a movement here. It could be also like a scene that you see in the tubes. That always was in my mind as well. So this spirit are actually very much there where we are.
And yet at the same time, when we first hear the word reparation, we think of reparations. We think of Wiedergutmachung. We think of trying to make good what cannot be made good.
Yeah.
And the sort of the essential hopelessness of that, which goes back to the same hopelessness of Tikkun Olam.
Exactly. Yeah.
Can we fix things? Can we ever fix things? Can we ever arrive at a place where living with this pain is possible? And this is our bridge, right?
This is the bridge. I think this is the bridge.
Part of the exhibition,
yes.
which I think, the next part of the exhibition that it will be coming in a few weeks, 3 beautiful, amazing works, which I think in their own way are very hopeful. And
they definitely bring some hope in the whole show. Something is lift up from the color.
Something had happened to you when you were working on all of this. I think you went through a transformation of your own.
Maybe that's a way to say. That's a way to see it. But I think it's like when I do the walk, it's like a process where it's not like I do. It's not like I did the last walks at the end, so they came up afterwards.
Yeah.
It's more like in the process of the 2-3 years, I had like this thoughts like how to combine, and then when we talked with Marcus also about the show, we were like, it's very interesting to have like this movement also in the show. Like this period is so dynamic, everything changes all the time. Like let's bring this, also there in the show. And of course, how to make this movement, it was like, let's bring it something, because for me art is also has to do with a healing process. That's definitely something that you see in the...
While you were painting these works that also, I think, pose such central and pressing questions, at the same time you were simultaneously exploring the answers in other works, and we want to kind of bring these answers, especially to the great question presented by this work, to the gallery in 3 weeks, and we hope you'll join us for that shift, for that transformation. We're really looking forward to it. And thank you so much for being here.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Deborah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you for having me.